Bring this Teaching and Learning Committee meeting to order on April 10th at 6:11 p.m. I will take roll call. Michael Loth.
Here.
Tracy Pollock.
Here.
Russ Ewert, myself, here. Item 3, agenda revisions and approval.
Move to approve today's agenda.
Second.
Tracy with the motion, Michael with the second. All in any discussion?
Nope.
All in favor?
Aye.
Item 4, approval of minutes from February 13th, 2020. Should be 3 from what I'm reading on my piece of paper here.
Move to approve the minutes of February 13th, 2023.
Second.
Michael with the motion, Tracy with the second. All in favor, if no discussion?
Aye.
Aye. And we will move on to item 5, consent review and discussion. We have none. Item 6, reports and updates. Do the Math Tier 3 interventions K through 8. We have Jake Miziak with us to present.
All right. So in an effort to make the Teaching and Learning Committee aware of some of the curriculums that we're looking at as we make sure that we have the necessary curriculums in place for our students, I'm bringing this to you prior to bringing it to the Finance Committee to provide you with an update on it and to seek any additional questions that you might have about this program. So I provided a link in the background so that you can go to that website and explore what Do the Math is. So this year, Julia Leeson, math interventionists, the school psychologists and principals have worked together to evaluate our response to intervention process, or RTI. In that review, we determined some of the areas of need. So one of the areas that popped up as an area of need were specifically our Tier 3 interventions. So there was a question that was posed: is this a part of our multi-tiered systems of support process? And this would be. So when we think about Tier 1 instruction, that's the instruction that all students get. In the elementary setting, that's Bridges Math. So Bridges Math also has built into a Tier 2 intervention. So there are interventions that our interventionists can use that are associated directly with Bridges Math curriculum. The math interventionists identified a gap in our response, and that was at the Tier 3 level. So the Tier 3 level would be for students who struggled with universal instruction. Once we use the Tier 2 response, they continue to not demonstrate progress, so we have to try something different. So that's the Tier 3 response. Typically when we talk about a Tier 3 response, we're looking at about 5% of our students that are going to require a Tier 3 response. And part of being a Tier 3 response, you're looking at something that would increase the intensity of the curriculum, increase the explicitness of instruction. You would deliver the instruction in a different way for students. So typically you're looking at a different curricular option because it's going to present the information in a different way. Although it's not the goal of the multi-tiered system of supports, when students don't respond to intervention, then we start looking at things like special education and specific learning disabilities in math when they're not responding to instruction presented in those different formats. So Do the Math would be a specific curriculum to address those needs. Do the Math, when we talk about students who aren't responding to instruction, there are specific areas that we're looking at. So some of the things that we look at are number sense, math fluency, the ability to produce accurate calculations, and students' mathematical reasoning. The interventions that we use with students are to address those specific areas. The total cost of Do the Math, at this point in time I have a quote from the company, but they've provided me kind of all of the resources that would go along with the curriculum. So at this point the cost for the curriculum wouldn't exceed $27,500. I believe that within that quote there are elements that we may not need. My best estimate at this point in time is there's about $11,000 worth of that program that I think might be not necessary for our Tier 3 response. So when we look specifically what a Tier 3 response is and the specific need that we would need for our system, that part of the curriculum I'm still evaluating to make sure that it's appropriate for us. And then in terms of funding for this for next year, this was originally written into my ESSER loss of learning plan, so you'd see in there that there were interventions that were written in. I believe the number that I put into that plan was $22,000, and that was an estimate based on the resources that I had to identify what it would cost. There's also a portion of IDA funds that could be allocated towards that, so that's some of our special education funding. Part of special education funding could be used for early intervention. We're still in the budgeting process, so if we were to make a determination of how we were going to pay for that, I would bring that to the finance committee and explicitly say we're going to use our ESSER loss of learning dollars or IDA funds for it.
Questions?
I have none.
Thank you for putting a link in there. Made it easy to check, some of the online things. I did not go through all possibilities, but I think the one I clicked on was parent, and looked at those works, that stuff. It looked pretty good. I did not test out what it would look like if I was a student or a teacher, but
One other thing that I would add to that, that you reminded me of, because this was part of the ESSER loss of learning plan originally, one of the things that I considered was year-over-year costs that would be associated with this. So there are other math interventions that we could consider, but almost all of them have like a year-over-year subscription cost, or there would be additional materials that we would have to purchase for it. Do the Math is not only an intervention that would meet the criteria that we were looking for, but there isn't a year-over-year cost associated with it. So this is kind of like one of those one-time purchases that you wouldn't see additional expenditures for that. You could have some minimal ones for like loss of materials or something like that, but it wouldn't be.
I think that's key, right? To maximize our impact throughout years going forward with a one-time expense, and this seems to fit that mold. Mike said, I went through the link itself and I kind of looked at it from every angle, as well as I even got into, lets you get into some of the purchasing sides of it, which is interesting and have to figure out how you're going to decide to purchase that based on how they break it out. Obviously, it looks like we're going to their intervention program, not their full curriculum side. But it looked, it looked good from what I can tell and through a parent's eyes. And if there's no other questions on that, reiterate, it is for the step 3 of the multi-tiered systems of support is what we're discussing, right?
Yeah, so you'd hear about that. So when we talk about Tier 1 instruction, that's what all of our students are receiving right now. So we consider that's the base. Every student is receiving Tier 1 instruction. And then each step reduces that number of students who actually need that instruction. So again, Tier 3, typically you're looking at about 5% of our students who would require that intervention.
Okay. If nobody has any other questions, I think we can move on to item B, reading review update.
So again, to continue to make the board aware of the progress of the curriculum committees that are meeting, the K-8 team has met on several occasions. We've met with vendors, and all of those vendors were mentioned in the background. So that's Benchmark, Super Kids, Wonders, HMH, Interreading, Read Side by Side, and then Being a Reader. What we did was we looked at all of those curriculums, and one of the questions I received was, what are these curriculums? Do they have anything in common in terms of approach or resources? And when we think about these curriculums, the reason why we looked at them was part of the curriculum review process that I brought to the Teaching and Learning Committee. Was the team identified some priorities that they were looking for within the curriculum and what is known about high quality reading instruction. So at a previous committee, Russ mentioned the science of reading and some of the elements that are incorporated there. So looking at early literacy skills, those were things that these curriculums had to have for us to even consider them. Another piece of that is looking at ed reports, and ed reports although it's not the end-all be-all for looking at curriculums, it does give you an idea about the an outside reviewer's look at how well it meets standards, and that's another consideration that we're looking at. We're looking at, do these curriculums meet our prioritized standards? And all of them were contenders from those two standpoints, but once you get the curricular materials in your hand and you get access to the online materials, you can start to weigh which one meets some of those themes better than others, and which it meets the approach that we want to have with students better than others, and again, which ones are going to create the learning experience for our students and provide the best opportunity for them to learn how to read and read to learn. So from that, once they had those materials in their hands, we've been able to start to narrow the number of curriculums that we're looking at based on that criteria, and I've asked for feedback on each one of those curriculums from members of the review committee. So the next step of this would be that I will bring to the Teaching and Learning Committee not only the curriculums that we would look to pilot from that list, but also the pilot plan. I can kind of give you a 10,000-foot view of what that pilot plan would look like. So for K-5, it's fairly important to try and start that pilot in September. One of the reasons why is just the natural way that reading curriculums build on each other. It becomes less important at the middle school to start in September. Often those curriculums are built into modules, so it's looking at specific genres of reading and things like that, so it's a little bit easier to move those around. So it's a little less important at the middle school level to have a September start. It sometimes is beneficial, but it's not a must. The review committee kind of felt like September is an ideal time to start looking at a curriculum for reading. So what we would do is, as a committee, we would narrow the list of curriculums down. Based on the conversations that we've had so far, it looks very likely that we would have a challenge pilot in which we would look at 2 curriculums. One of the ways to think about this is that K2 is going to look slightly different than 3-5. Many of the curriculums that I listed have a K5 progression or a K8 progression within them, so we could have exactly the same curriculum K8, but the question that the review committee is answering is, what's the best curriculum for our readers? So often K2 might look differently than what 3-5 looks like, and different from what 6-8 looks like, because kids at each one of those levels of development are slightly different in terms of their learning needs. So what we would do is we would determine what we would want to pilot K2 as a challenge, 3-5 as a challenge, and then 6-8 as a challenge if necessary. And like I said, I think the way that the team is leaning, I'll be able to bring you 2 curriculums at each one of those levels that they're interested in piloting in the fall. I just wanted to make you aware of what we were looking at as soon as possible.
Any questions, gentlemen?
No questions.
I'm good.
Can you give me an understanding of what the review team makeup is
Sure.
for this? Does it incorporate all of our elementary schools, all of our schools, various personnel from each one at differing levels?
Yep. So the K-8 review includes teachers from as many grade levels as that were interested. So they're at upper elementary, we lost one of our 5th grade teachers, and that was one of our representatives. But otherwise, we've got grade level representation K-8. In addition to that, we have teachers, reading specialists, principals, and myself all a part of the review team. So when the review team was built, with the previous director of teaching and learning, he offered a survey to the staff, and then anybody who was interested reached out and said, this is why I'm interested in being a part of the review team. And based on the number of teachers who reached out, we were basically able to take everybody, because we'd want to look at making sure that all buildings were represented and all grade levels were represented, because that gives us the best chance to get a wide perspective on the curriculums. With that being said, when we look at the pilot process doesn't have to be just solely based on the people who are on the review team. I can look outside of that. Obviously, the teachers who are on the review team get priority in whether or not they would like to pilot. All of the teachers who are on the review team have expressed interest in piloting the curriculums. But with that being said, one of the things that we would want to do is give the opportunity so that we can have almost a challenge throughout all the grade levels, so that we can again get as much information as possible about how those curriculums perform in front of our students. Because at the end of the day, that's what's most important, is when we put that curriculum in our teachers' hands with our kids, how did the students perform with it? Because there are a lot of curriculums that look really nice and they have lots of flashy components to them, and they look great on paper, but it's really where the rubber hits the road when kids have it in their hands and what we see our students do with it, that we're going to be able to make the most informed decision about what curriculum we should move forward with as our resource.
Sure. So, but the key there is, right, we have internal experts from each school involved. Everyone's kind of getting some form of say or participation if they wanted to, and that kind of helps build that vertical alignment, that cross alignment between the grade schools.
Correct.
I'm curious, when you guys meet and the time that's spent looking at some of the initial work, like how much time is dedicated to that?
Yeah, so this is one of the challenges of doing curriculum reviews now, and Chris was the director of teaching and learning. He would probably be able to tell you that there were opportunities for us to take big chunks of days to do that during the school day, and given some of the constraints around subbing and things like that with a team that's as big as the reading review team, we haven't been able to have those huge chunks of time. So the teachers who are on the review team, one of the things that I can tell you about them is they've spent an enormous amount of time outside of just that large meeting of us together to dig into the resources. So, there was some emails that I received over break from one of our teachers who clearly over break was digging into resources that she was getting excited about and then sent me information on. So I don't think I could quantify the exact amount of hours, but we're looking at like an hour and a half to 2 hours after school, and that's kind of the maximum, because when you think about somebody who's taught all day and then I'm asking them to spend an hour and a half to 2 hours with me, although I'm an exciting guy, eventually their steam runs out and there's only so much they can sustain. So with that being said, like they've done some homework outside of the meeting times that we're at to take a look at that. But some of those big picture things, when we talk about what are the themes, that's a night that we're spending together talking about what's important about reading. There was some time on one of the in-service days where I pulled the reading review team, where we built some of that background knowledge about what's important in reading, so that kind of helped drive the themes. So there's some learning that's involved that then informs the priorities that we have going forward. So it is a time commitment for teachers to be a part of these teams.
I mean, I think if you have that opportunity to share that kind of information as we go through this, I think it's important to recognize the fact that, I mean, everything you said, that it is, these teachers are in effect volunteering their time to put into that and highlight, let's give them credit where credit is due when it comes to that.
Yeah, and I think, and we're going to talk about it coming up here, with illustrative math, this big of a project that was, this kind of dwarfs it, right? Given the scope and size of what we're talking about, the team's doing a fantastic job on it. I know they are compensated for some of that that extended work time. So we must be able to quantify that somehow.
Yeah, so there's the time that they meet with me that they do fill out a timesheet for that piece, but I can tell you that the work that I've seen from that group has kind of exceeded that time.
Very good. We appreciate all their hard work on it, because it is a big lift for the district, and it's an important project for us. So, any other questions or comments? We can move on to C, counseling program K through 5. I know Mr. Lamb going to be here this evening, but I believe he cannot be. Jake, you're going to help us with this one?
Take it away. So part of this was to just provide the Teaching and Learning Committee some background on the counseling program that we have at the K-5 level. So there were some questions just about the mechanics about how it works. So this is kind of a broad overview from that, and then we can dive deeper as needed. So the counseling program at the K-5 level, our elementary counselors provide large group lessons to our students in all classrooms, 5K through 5th grade. And the frequency of those lessons is about 15 visits per classroom per year for a duration of about 30 to 45 minutes. There is some variation, as you could imagine, from all of the elementary schools. They all do have a scope and sequence that they follow at each one of the schools, but there is some variation that's there. One of the things that our counselors have done this year during in-service days is to meet to try and be more consistent in terms of what that scope and sequence looks like. So it's moving in that direction. A next step for that counseling crew could be to develop a UBD similar to what we will have for the other subject areas, where they can start to define what the essential outcomes of the counseling curriculum is, or the counseling program is. And then in addition to that, one of the things that was asked was around the area of how do we know that we're having an impact. That's something that you can do through UBD. So you can identify the outcomes that we're looking for, and then in stage 2 of UBD, we can come up with how would we assess that to determine what kind of impact we're having on students. So we could define as a team kind of what the measurables would be. So I know that Mr. Lamb had talked about in his mental health update some of the criteria that was sent back to him for, like, here are some of the things that we're noticing in our students. That could be some of the measurables that we could associate with the counseling program. We could say, here are some of the outcomes that we're looking for, and this is the impact that it's having. So with the visits that they have, those 15 visits per year in the 30 to 45 minute time frame, in the background I put some of the kind of broad topics that could be included in there. So some of them are skills for learning. This is big at the 5K level, so our kids who are new to learning, some of the routines that go into how to participate in a classroom, turn take, how to work in small groups and things like that. So that's the focus for those skills for learning. The empathy, learning how to identify and understand their own emotions and the feelings of others. Emotional management, so specific skills for calming down when experiencing strong feelings. So in there you could think about things like self-regulation for when students are frustrated. So if we're doing our job on the curriculum side of things, we're putting students in positions where they can experience what we'll call desirable difficulties. So there's frustration that's associated with learning. That's when we know that we've hit that sweet spot. So it's not too easy that they're flowing around at an easy pace, but it's one of those things where they've got to stop and think, and often that increases frustration. So part of this curriculum is, or the counseling program is to help students understand what to do in those situations, how to continue to persevere when they've experienced a frustration and learning starts to get challenging. And then the same thing with problem solving. Typically in classrooms, when you've got 24 students in there, there are opportunities where students might have conflict, and the curriculum and program offers opportunities to help support students in understanding how to progress through that. One of the questions that was asked was about the differences in how much time they get, and 5th graders get a little bit of extra time because there's some of the ACP work that's built into 5th grade and the G-Talks that then transitions them into middle school. So it's, again, not universal. At one of the elementaries, they pretty much get identical time, and then at some of the others, it's an increase of about 5 to 6 sessions extra that they would get. There were specific questions that were asked about second step. Second step was, and I tried to dig into when it became part of the Germantown educational program. It's been here for at least 9 years, because one of our counselors said it was in her office when she got the job and she joined the district. So the second step SEL program at the elementary level has been here for at least 9 years. And then it, as you know, was not adopted for the middle school SEL program. One of the pieces to that could be that for younger students often need explicit instruction in certain skills, whereas once they've transitioned to middle school, some of that explicit instruction may fade a little bit, so it may be more appropriate for younger students versus middle school, but both of those decisions were made pre-me, so I don't want to speak for anybody in terms of why it was selected for one over the other. And then another question that I had was the reason for selecting this curriculum, and was it for the purposes of addressing, specific behaviors or something that we were seeing in students. And again, the thought behind having an explicit counseling curriculum in elementary school would be kind of the universal approach. So that, again, this would be like a tier 1 type thing, so it's geared towards all students. When we talk about tier 2 or tier 3, that gets into Mr. Lamb's mental health piece of it, where we have experts that are working with students on very specific behaviors that they're seeing or struggles that they might be having. So when we think about classrooms, as I mentioned before, there are typical things that you can expect, and one of the things that we want to make sure that happens kind of as a foundation of solid instruction would be that you have a positive classroom culture that's going on, so students understand how to turn take, how to resolve disagreements, how to work in groups, because that's going to help maximize the time that they are working on, math or reading and things like that. So again, at the middle school level, one of the things that our 8th grade teachers have kind of latched on to was building thinking classrooms, and a piece of that is using vertical boards and having kids work in teams and then debate the processes by which they solve math problems, and that's going to be a effective way for kids to engage in discourse around math. But there are skills that come with that, and those are skills that I can tell you middle school kids kind of have to learn over time, is how do you engage in that discourse and respectfully disagree with somebody who's taken a completely different approach to solving a problem. And I think I have covered most of the questions that were posed, but I tried to do that without reading each one, so if I missed something, please let me know.
Mike?
The acronym UVD, I think it was?
UBD.
UBD, what is it?
That's Understanding by Design. So that's the same one that I used for when we talked about the process that we were using for the development of our math curriculum or science or social studies. So UBD, again, when we talk about stage 1 of Understanding by Design, it clearly articulates the outcomes that we're looking for. So you can take any resource, and this is similar to what I had described for our health curriculum, where you've got a resource in this textbook. We're not reading every single page in the textbook, so that's a resource. UBD, or Understanding by Design, helps us articulate what are the outcomes specifically associated with that resource that we're looking for, and what are the outcomes that we're going to assess. And then we haven't talked a lot about stage 3 of UBD, but that's really the learning plan. So how are we going to get them there?
And another one, ACP?
Academic and Career Planning. So that's a part of our late elementary, middle school, and then high school program.
Okay. It's more for our people at home.
Absolutely, I understand. Sometimes I forget when I've defined those acronyms. I apologize for the edu-speak.
That's quite all right, thank you.
So at the core of this program, we're looking at a lot of different, I don't want to use the word issues, but I will, that we're seeing in our students and addressing them from different directions. Are we seeing the results we're looking for? I mean, I guess I can't ask you this because you haven't been here for 9 years. But is this program taking us in the direction we need, with the caveat that in a school the walls talk, and it seems that I tend to hear every grade coming into the next grade tends to be the worst with behavioral issues, whether it's graduating from elementary to middle or middle to high school. I've heard that frequently throughout my years in the district. I have a feeling that's a natural disposition maybe, but are we seeing results in those areas, or are we not seeing results in those areas? Or is it not that easy to quantify?
I'm sure we could quantify it. I don't have the numbers before me to tell you that, and I don't know that we've collected the data for 9 years. So that's one of those things where we probably have some anecdotal evidence from that. That, you know, I think some of that was a part of the report that Mr. Lamb shared in terms of his mental health, that, you know, there's some things that we're noticing. I think when we talk about a universal curriculum, part of it isn't just to target, like, it really is foundational to what we know works in classrooms. So when we talk about, you know, what are the must-haves that we're going to look for in instruction, if you don't have a positive classroom culture, it's really hard to have students learn. If they don't feel welcome, they don't feel like
Wouldn't matter what it is,
Yep,
right?
it doesn't. Right, all the work that I do for each one of the curriculums and the reading curriculum that we're going to bring in, and the writing program we're working on, right, all of those things fall apart real quick if that classroom culture isn't there. And part of having a curriculum that's targeted on some of the soft skills of learning, that it's just one of the opportunities for students to step back and take a look at it. I would say that when you think about what happens in classrooms, these 15 visits from the counselor, 30 to 45 minutes, that's kind of a reinforcement of what teachers do a lot anyway. If you visit classrooms in the first couple weeks of school, that's a lot of what they're building, is they're building so much of that classroom culture to make sure that once they put kids into groups, they can function, because so much of the learning that students are asked to do now is collaborative. So you can imagine that all of those relationship skills that we're trying to build in kids are going to support the learning that they're going to do in classrooms.
Is there something this program can offer to take that off of the teachers? To some degree, they're going to have to do that. But can we lessen that burden for our teachers so they can focus on their trade skills, which is teaching the students via this program or a different program?
I'm going to interrupt because based off of what you just said a few moments ago, kind of clicked. Is obviously this program from 9 years to today has probably evolved in some way. They've made updates. And you pointed out that there's an in-progress work regarding making sure the different buildings kind of cover the same thing. They each have their own unique take on it, which is perfectly fine, but just to make sure they're dotting their I's, crossing their T's at each location. Do we have any sense of when's the last time we actually reviewed this and said, like, we're still on the right path regardless of measurement, because I don't have confidence that it's been done to an extent that we might need to. When's the last time this was reviewed to go, yeah, this is still appropriate, there isn't something, I'm not going to say better, more appropriate for our needs? Because 9 years ago is very different than today with regards to the internet and the world that we live in, and the results of COVID and all of those different things.
That I don't know the last time that it went through a systematic review. And then if you were to do a systematic review, it would mirror what I've described for the reading review. So when you think about all of the steps that are involved there, that's essentially any program that you're offering could be placed under a similar review, where you analyze current state, you look at our needs, you look at the current programming to fill those needs. So a similar process like that could be used with a counseling program.
Jake and I had a discussion that's, quite frankly, that's why it's on the agenda for that. Part of it was I wanted to know when we started this, but you know, is it accomplishing the mission we were looking to accomplish? Is that the same mission from then that needs to occur today? And do we need to start that process now? I know we have 3 going on, so some heavy lifting involved. This one would be a little more counselor involved versus teaching staff. Obviously, you're going to pull teachers into this too. You're not going to do this in silos. Do we have the bandwidth to do that and given kind of some of the conversation we've already had here tonight, I think we need to start taking that step. For a variety of reasons, and I go back to my initial question here. Is there something we can do to help build that culture more positively in our students while diminishing the teachers' burden of some of these soft skill building? Obviously, I think the whole review process has to take place in order to answer that question. Not that I'm giving you a question there, a thought. And this is generally, and for the public to understand why I had a conversation with Jake to start pushing this to the forefront. I think
And
we are,
An area it could fall into is the curriculum review, because before you start to discuss the curriculum our school counselors develop, we have to define a school counseling program. What is the role and responsibility of an elementary counselor?
I
middle school
would
counselor,
I would
high school
very much
counselor,
see this,
before we go into.
I would very much see this taking that same roadmap. It's, I don't want to call it non-academical, but
But you think about,
it's a soft skill building that the students need.
yeah, because what the function of an elementary counselor compared to middle and high, though they fall under the same guise, they're different responsibilities even set forth by the state. So academic and career planning, ACP, is very top heavy in high school, rightfully so, as you've seen presentations this year from our high school administration, and then the middle school counselors helping set that stage for future career and academic planning. The elementary piece is more the whole child aspect in the outline that you've seen in this background, but they all still function as school counselors. So we have to first define uniquely what that looks like and what the expectations are, and then there's a program review for that.
Sounds like we have a starting point.
Sure. But we could build that into
Yeah.
the review process and
Yeah,
timeline.
Yeah. I think it's a conversation under this committee that's what I've kind of asked everyone to do, is be involved in a conversation on some level. And this, I feel this is where we need to start with it. What do we have? Is it right? Is it the time to start working on it? You guys gotta let us know if the bandwidth is there
Yep.
to get it done.
Because you have 3 new curriculums coming on next year as well for first year review. 2, physical education / health and science, besides the continuation of reading and world language. We'll talk.
That's a conversation, we can bring it back,
Yep.
you guys bring it back to us and
Yep.
let us know what you think, but I think it's to his point, we can build the best curriculums in the world, but if the culture's not there, who's left behind in it? So, anything else, gentlemen?
Nope.
We can move on to item 7, unfinished business. We have none. Item 8, new business, illustrative math. It's sort of new, we've been talking about it for a while.
Yeah, so this is sort of new in that I placed it in the wrong section last time. So this is the recommendation. So I've given you updates along the way. And again, the process that we've used for illustrative math is different than what we've used for our reading curriculum. Part of that was just residue from the way that illustrative came to the Germantown School District. But nonetheless, our teachers have engaged with the resource and have identified it as one that they would like to move forward with. So the resource is provided by Open Up Resources. I had provided the link previously, but it is accessible. Open Up provides all of its resources for anyone to access. So what I would like to recommend is that the board approve illustrative math as the primary resource to be used for our 6th-8 math instruction. And as this is the first curriculum that I'm bringing to the full board, if there is something that the Teaching and Learning Committee would like me to provide to the full board in terms of a report there, I would be happy to do that.
I did ask Jake today as we reviewed this to bring to the full board, how did we get here? So a comprehensive timeline. I think one of the questions that him and I have been a part of in other districts are presenting information more in a formal presentation through a PowerPoint with members of the committee or just Jake or whoever it might be. But to Jake's point, it's the first curriculum that we're asking for approval. So we'd want your input on what maybe the full board would want to see on the 24th.
Yeah, I mean, so to me, this committee, we've talked about it, but I think it's a good thing to bring all of those conversations back and how we got here. Now, this particular team's worked on this through two administrations, so it's probably taken a little longer. As Jake said, it's taken on by a different approach than probably what we'll be using going forward. Nonetheless, a lot of the work has been done. Some staff has really put some time into what we have. We should give them a chance to show us how we got here. The community, really.
Sure.
How we got here. I think it's important, and depending on how this goes and that conversation goes, give them a chance to be thanked for that work that they put into it.
I agree. I think take the time to show the work and everything else. I think that's sometimes communicated throughout our schools. Take your time, show your work. Might as well lead by example.
To that point, my son answered on the math test, show your work, how it was done, and his response was written out, I did it in my head. That should probably not be to some of the presentations. We did it in our head.
That is a very common middle school response.
Well, it's in grades.
Oh, he's gifted, so.
But nonetheless, yeah, I think it'd be great to have a nice presentation center, what we have here. I don't have any specific questions on it, given the lengths of conversations we've had and the time to review. I mean, we've included, once again, the link here if anyone would like to review it. We've all had plenty of time to. If you two don't have any questions or.
Yeah, I mean, I think the link would be there for the full board, and I think you're saying a presentation to the full board would be nice, right? And so, sounds good to me.
With that, I would take a recommendation.
I'd like to make a motion to move forward with a positive recommendation to the full board to approve Illustrative Math as our 6-8 math curricular resource.
Second?
Tracy with the motion to approve, and Mike with the second. If there's any discussion, concerns, I see none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And with that, I will take one more motion.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Mike with the motion to adjourn, Tracy with the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.
It's 6:53.
Oh, I apologize. Yes, it is 6:53 at the close of this meeting.